All right, welcome everyone to Chef Liron Cooks. Today we're doing comfort food and we are going to do pot pies. We're gonna focus on a roasted vegetable pot pie today, but I'm gonna give you a few tips to do some other ones for this kitchen because it is a kosher kitchen and the pot pie, both in it has butter and milk. And the dough usually has some butter in it as well. We can't do chicken. We're keeping it kosher. So no chicken and no chicken or beef broth or stock, only vegetable stock. So we're going to get started. And I actually have a timer that's going to go off in a minute. I'll deal with that. But we're going to start with cutting the vegetables. So I'm going to grab my tray. I have a lot of the vegetables ready cut. And what we want is to start with the butter. Ooh. The butter in the pot. I'm gonna get all these ingredients. All right, so we have half a cup of butter and it's gonna go in the pot. I'm gonna turn it on. All right, we're gonna let that start melting, and I have here salt and pepper and the dry thyme. I'm going to put that together with the butter. Once that's melted, I'm going to add to it all of the root vegetables, and then I'm going to lightly coat them, and that can go into the oven. I'm going to use a spatula. We're just going to move it around a little bit. Now for the pot, oh, that's my timer. All right, so for the pot, I know it says a Dutch oven pot in the recipe, but you can go ahead and use any pot that you know can go into the oven. So obviously not pots that have plastic handles or anything like that. And it's better if the pot can go up to 450 degrees, but if it can only go up to 400 degrees, I made it at home. Go ahead and just set the oven to 400 instead of 450. That's still okay. You may need to roast it just for a little longer, but it'll work as well. So I'm letting the butter melt here. I'm just gonna quickly swish it around to help it melt a little faster just because all my vegetables are already cut. And the one thing I haven't done yet for these is soaking the leeks. So I already have the leeks all cut up. And I have here a bowl of cold water, and I'm just going to pour them in a little bit. And this is basically going to rinse the leeks because it's really hard to get into all the separate part of the leeks, and they can get dirt stuck inside of it sometimes. So you want to just let it soak in cold water for a little bit, swish it around a little bit to get all of that dirt off. Obviously, we're not using this water in it. Okay, so the butter is melted. I'm going to turn it down a little bit.
Liron,
Yes.
do you have a celery root? We had a question about celery root.
Yes, so I actually saved the celery root, and this is the celery root cut up. I have the celery root and the leeks saved that I will be able to show you how to cut. So I just put in the celery root. This is potatoes. I know they look a little brown. That's because I cut them and I didn't soak them in water. Sweet potato. Carrots. And parsnip. And the last is going to be our leeks. And I'm just going to grab it out of here. Okay. Okay, and I'm going to lightly toss this. And all I want to do is to coat everything with the butter. So we just want to make sure that everything is nicely coated with the butter. And then it's ready to go into the oven. So I'm going to open the oven. And the timer was for these vegetables, which may have been in there for a few minutes too long. Okay. And all right, so we have our vegetables that have been roasting in the oven, and this was for 30 minutes, and I set a timer for every 10 minutes to stir them. Okay, and now you just need to be a little gentle so that you don't crumble up all of the potatoes and a bit of the starchier ones that may be soft. And you can see that there's some brown spots. It needs a little bit of deglazing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set all of these aside. All right, and I'm using here brandy. This is the alcohol I decided to use. And I'm pouring it on top of here. And I'm just gonna stir that in a little bit. And don't forget, please, your pot has been in the oven for 30 minutes. It's going to be very hot. Don't grab the handles with your hand.
I don't have brandy at home. Could I use like a white wine or something?
Yeah, go ahead. White wine, that would be totally fine as well. White wine, you can use cognac, you can use
What happens if you don't drink? Could you use a little bit of the broth?
yeah, you can use a little bit of the broth. Okay, so I lightly deglaze the side there. It really isn't that much. And next is going to be the flour. Okay, we're gonna add the flour in. And I'm going to almost touch the pot. Lightly coat these vegetables.
So would this be considered making a roux?
It is kind of making a roux, but in like an opposite way, because that is what these the flour is doing, but you're not cooking it, the flour in the butter. So it is making the roux, it is cooking it and thickening it in that way, but you're kind of doing it opposite. So you're first adding the vegetables and then you're adding the flour. So next what we're going to
if we wanted to add diced chicken, at what point would we do that?
So if at this point, because the chicken is going to be already cooked, you don't want to have it roasted and dried out. So at this point, once you add all the liquids to it, you'd also add the chicken. I'm just gonna put a timer for myself for the roasted vegetables that are in the oven, the vegetables that are in the oven right now. So we remember, okay, and here I actually have double the amount of the broth. And again, this is vegetable stock, sorry, not broth, because we're keeping it dairy. So I'm just gonna measure, we want 2.5 cups. So I have 2 cups. I'm gonna pour that in.
What's the difference between broth and stock?
The broth is thicker than the stock. So if you look at stock, you're gonna see that one of the ingredients in stock is broth.
Do you have a favorite vegetable stock that you use?
No, there aren't really that many that are kosher. I usually just use, they have them in the kosher section. They'll have chicken and beef broth and stock in the kosher section. And I'm adding the milk. We're gonna lightly stir this now. One other option, if you want that chicken flavor actually, is to use a soup powder, and I'll show you in just a minute. I'm just going to gently stir this. So now that it has liquids, it's a little easier to stir it without mashing up the potatoes. The potatoes are really the softest vegetable in here right now. So it was mushing them a little bit before I added the liquids, but now that I have the liquids, it's much easier to stir it without disturbing it. And I'm just gonna double check with my recipe just because.
Chef, can I ask you a question? If you we're making it strictly without milk. Could you use coconut milk? Would that really alter the taste
Yes,
that much?
it would.
Okay. Okay.
I,
All right.
if you don't want to use dairy, I would just go with more stock. I wouldn't add coconut milk. That would alter the flavor a little bit too much. I'm gonna turn up the heat here a little bit because we want this to come to a boil. That's gonna help it thicken, and I'm gonna show you in the meanwhile. So we have these powders, and it's an Israeli company, and this is basically chicken stock, but it's non-dairy. It's not meat, so it is parve. It's just chicken flavored. So you can use this if you do want that chicken flavor, but you want to keep it parve. And it just has instructions on the back on how much boiling water to add for how many tablespoons. So if you want 2.5 cups, it's about a tablespoon. And they have this for chicken and onion soup, and I think also beef. The beef may be.
I use that parve chicken all the time.
Yeah, it's really good. And it's really easy if you want a chicken stock, but you don't want to have it meat.
It's very high in sodium.
Yes, it is.
It is. I would not put any salt and pepper in addition to that. So when this will boil, only then I'll add the fresh thyme. And if you want, you can also add some chopped parsley. I chose not to add the parsley here, but you're welcome to use that. I'm gonna set these aside for a minute. And while it is, oh, I see it's starting to come to a boil. Okay. Okay, so now that it's coming to a boil, I'm gonna add the fresh thyme. I'm just gonna turn it off and let it sit for a minute. It's gonna thicken a little more once it cools. Now, I know I wrote there 2 teaspoons of thyme. I intended to write 2 sprigs of thyme. Now, I don't want you to put the whole sprig of thyme. I want you to take the 2 sprigs and peel the thyme off, the thyme leaves off of them. 2 teaspoons would be a lot. It comes up to about 1 teaspoon of thyme leaves. All right, so I'm gonna turn this off, and you can, I don't know that if you can tell from it, but it has really thickened. So it's a lot thicker than it was to begin with, and I'm just gonna turn that off. And even though it's off, you know, the pot is still hot, and here the stove top is still hot, so it still is conducting some heat, even though it's off. So it's still continuing to cook and continuing to thicken a little bit. And now what we're gonna do quickly while I have that sitting, I'm going to wipe down the counter a little bit, and I'm going to roll out the puff pastry dough. So I've chosen to use puff pastry dough to top it. And the puff pastry dough, when you buy it from the store, is still very thick. So we want to roll it out a little bit, otherwise you're going to have a very thick piece of dough. This is the one I used. It's parve, it's not dairy, which I don't like as much, but I couldn't find a dairy one. If you can find one that's dairy, that would be much better because it means it has butter in it and not margarine. And what I'm going to do, I let it sit in the refrigerator overnight. So that's how I defrosted it. And I'm going to take a little bit of flour and toss it on the counter and then put the dough on top. The ramekins that I'm going to use are these. And you want to try and get a cutter that's going to be a little bit bigger This is the biggest cutter that I had. You can also just cut squares or cut around an extra ramekin if you want, because it's better for the dough to start out coming over the sides of the ramekin. That way it'll hold all the moisture inside and then it won't boil over as much. And it'll also hold it in place instead of falling in to the dish. So that's what I'm going to use, and I have this cutter, and we're going to need to make slits before we put it on top because it needs to have somewhere for the steam to come out. So I'm starting with the dough this size, and we're going to roll it out. So I'm going to use the rolling pin. And I just want to loosen it a bit, make sure that it's not stuck to the counter. And I've actually close to double the size of what it was. I'm making it pretty thin. Okay, and now that I've rolled it out, we're gonna cut the circles. You can see it's not very even. It really doesn't need to be. A little bit more. Okay. And when you cut down, you want to give it a little twist to make sure it cuts all the way through. Now, what I did, I've made these earlier, and I had some leftover pieces of dough. And I just took all those scraps, and I used those to cover one of them. So it doesn't have to be a perfect circle, and there's no reason to just throw away all the dough that's left over. You can just take all those pieces and kind of make a mosaic and cover the top. Obviously, it's not going to cover the sides, but at least you're not wasting as much dough. All right, and do 2 more. And it doesn't have to be perfect circles. It's okay. You can also just cut it into squares and do a square. It doesn't have to be the same shape. So now that we have that cut, I'm going to make my egg wash, which I have over here. So I'm going to use 2 eggs here just because I have a little more filling that we're going to use. All right, and I'm gonna toss it up with a fork. And I always like to add a little bit of liquids to the egg wash to make it easier to brush. And also it gives it a little more color and flavor. When I do challah, I always add water to it. Here we're gonna add a little bit of milk. All right, I'm gonna stir that all together. It helps to thin out the egg wash and not have as many clumps. It's usually the egg whites that kind of stick together, and it's hard to make it thinner. You know, pieces of egg. Okay, so we're gonna fill these ramekins. Now, if you wanted to, at this point, you can add a little bit more salt and pepper. I'm actually gonna do that right now. Salt, pepper. All right. And stir that in a little bit. And the pot's still going to be pretty hot. Still want to be careful. Now I'm going to scoop them out and put them into the ramekins. Now, depending on your size of the ramekin, then you'll see how many of the pot pies you can make. If you want to just have a large one for everyone to share, you can definitely go ahead and do that and have like a large pie dish and just do a large circle to cover it. You don't need to do individual ones. I have these ramekins. I have some aluminum pie tins that I've used. You can really do a combination. You can use a little bit larger containers. I think I used the other day, I had some of the rectangle Pyrex, glass Pyrexes that you can put in the oven. So I use those. Those are like a nice shareable size. Fill these up, and you don't want to fill it up all the way. I'm filling them up pretty much to the line. They are going to bubble up. The liquids are going to bubble up and come over the sides. So you don't want to fill it up all the way. Now for the ramekins, I'm going to take the egg wash and I'm going to lightly brush the top of the ramekins so that the dough will stick to the top and stick around the sides and not just fall in as soon as it goes into the hot oven. So I'm going to put that on a little bit. Right, and now before we cover it, we need to make the slits. So this is a big knife. You can go ahead and use a smaller knife. I'm just gonna make a few holes for the air to come out. This is the one that we put the egg wash on. I'm gonna make a little bit here. And you may need to just stretch it out a little bit. Just stretching out with my hands, because I already used the largest cutter I had. And I'm just pulling it over the sides, and with my palms, I'm just pressing it on top a little bit just to make sure it's nice and secure, all right? And the most important thing with these, place them on a tray before it goes into the oven because they will drip. You don't want it to drip onto the bottom of your oven. So I'm gonna set these aside. We're gonna do a few more of these, and these are the pieces that I was talking about. We're gonna do a few more of these, and I'm gonna put them in the oven, and then I'm gonna show you how to cut some of those vegetables. Does anyone have questions while I'm doing this?
Does the temperature stay at 450 when you're putting them in with the pastry top on?
No, it's gonna go down to 400.
Okay.
Is that on the recipe, or did I forget to put that in?
I don't see it on there.
No, it's there. It's on number 3.
Oh, okay. I didn't see number 3. Okay. Yeah, it is. Thank you. It is.
Yeah.
I love mushrooms in my pot pie. Is there a good way to do it without them getting too watering down everything?
The mushrooms will water it down a little bit. What you can do is maybe saute the mushrooms separately, and that way it'll get that moisture out, and only add them after you've roasted the vegetables. So once the vegetables are roasted, at the same time you would add the chicken, then add the mushrooms if you'd like.
And I also will often put peas in mine. Do I have to thaw them, or can I use frozen peas?
I would thaw the frozen peas before you put them in. Yes. And then again, add them after the vegetables are roasted last. I mean, they don't need to cook. Plus, you're still putting this into the oven. So it's still going to cook for another like 20 minutes. It's really going to bubble inside. All right. And the last one. All right. All right. Last one that we're going to put here. Okay, and now before we put this in the oven, we need to put egg wash on top as well. Okay, we have these 4. All right.
I bet if you used coconut milk, you could also make it taste like Asian-y. And
Of
that would be really
course.
delicious. Like put some lemongrass or a little bit of curry or something like
Oh yeah,
that.
definitely.
All right, let us know how that goes. That sounds
Bring
delicious.
us some
Taster.
some tasting.
I'll have to find I brought some spices back from Cambodia. I'll have to find those.
Yeah.
What about adding a little curry powder to this?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, really, this is a very basic flavoring. If there's any other flavoring that you like, if you just want to add a little spice, you can go ahead and add a little bit of paprika or a little bit of cayenne pepper. You can definitely play with it and add a little bit of spices to what you like. That wouldn't hurt it. Okay, now let's turn this down a little bit. Oh, we're almost ready with that. Let's check these. So this is our second batch that we have in here. I'm going to mix it up a little bit. And I was just keeping my spatula inside the liquids just so that I have a place to put it without it getting my counter dirty. And without getting another container dirty, since that was already dirty. Okay, so I'm gonna close the oven. It was set at 450, so I'm gonna change it to 400. The root vegetables will be okay at 400. I don't want to hurt the pot pies that I just put inside. Okay, so we're gonna let that go for a little bit. And in the meanwhile, I'm going to start with some of the root vegetables that I wanted to show you. So hopefully, okay, you can all see the cutting board. I'm going to start with the leeks. So the leeks are pretty easy. They come, I got these at Wholesome Choice, and it comes packages of 3, and I use the 3 for this recipe. And really, most of the leek gets wasted. So we're going to take the leek, and you want to, this little bottom part is the roots. So we're going to cut the root off, and we're going to cut the top part off. This is what we're left with. That's it.
The green part is not edible?
I've always only used this part. I'd have to, you know, it may be because like this is basically like the white part in green onions. I'd have to look into it. I don't know if it's not edible because it's not good for you, or you just need to really cook it a lot for it to be edible. I'll have to look into that. And now to make strips out of it, I don't want it to be circles, so I'm going to cut it in half and then set each half downward so it's safe to cut. And then I'm just going to do slices.
When I clean leeks, I cut 2 slits in that part of it, you know, going 2 different directions. And then I run it under the water a lot. So that kind of gets any dirt out also.
Right. So then once you have it cut like this, I then go and put it into cold water. So this is for the leeks. That was a little bit easier, just a simple way to cut it. And now we have our celery roots.
You got that at Wholesome Choice?
Yeah, I got all the vegetables at Wholesome Choice. So you see the celery really growing out of it. And then it's the bulb.
That really is celery, and it really is the root of a celery?
Yep. Yeah, here, you want to smell it?
Oh, yes.
So you could use, like my dad, when he used to make chicken soup, he'll put in celery root into the soup, but he'll also use the celery and the leaves, and he'll cook them in the soup, and then he'll pull it out later. So for the celery root, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off the top, the celery. Okay, and then we have the flat side. And depending on how you want to do it, it would be a little more comfortable if you also cut a piece off the bottom. You see that's a whole root. And then you're going to just use the knife and I'm peeling it off. So, you know, I've never actually tried using a peeler. You could try a peeler. I think that it's just not even enough for a peeler. It may be too hard. And I'm just cutting off the whole outer part of it. And I washed these before. There's gonna be a lot of dirt on the outside of the root. There's still dirt on it, but you definitely wanna wash it before. I always rinse it after I finish peeling it, but you definitely also want to wash it before you peel it. Okay, so I finished one side. And now I need to go over to the other side. So I'm gonna flip it over. I'm gonna get this side. And you see this has like all the small roots that are really in the ground. And get the water for the celery.
Does celery root taste like celery?
No, I don't feel like it really has much flavor. It's more texture. It kind of, to me, it kind of tastes like a potato. Okay, I'm just trying to get that bottom part out, kind of wedging it off, trying to do it carefully. You don't want to cut yourself. My knife is very sharp. Okay, so once we have this is all mash. All right, what I do next, obviously I'm gonna rinse it. And now you can cut strips. I'm gonna wipe my knife. So you want to also clean the knife and the cutting board a little bit because you already have dirt that has accumulated from the roots from the outside of it. You want to make sure that it's all clean. And now I'm going to cut kind of strips out of it, pretty much the size that I want my cubes to be. And then once I've cut all the strips, you're going to flatten it and cut the cubes out of it. All right. Okay, so that's our celery root. Do we have any other questions? Oh. Any other questions before we go on? All right. So about halfway through, I'm just turning these around. We want to make sure that they all get browned evenly. The ovens are never baked evenly. You always need to turn them around a little bit. Depending on how your oven is, the heat either comes from the bottom or from the top. You kind of learn to know your oven and to know what it needs. And then it needs about 20 minutes in the oven. You're really just looking for it to be golden brown. And once it's the right color, like you can see right here, we have a few that are ready for us already. You can pull them out. Another important thing, if you're making them fresh, they'll be really, really, really hot when they come out of the oven. Let them sit for about 10 minutes before you want to eat them or when you're ready to serve. So you need them to sit for about 10 minutes before you can actually serve them. They're really going to be boiling inside. You won't necessarily tell that they're that hot because you have the puff pastry covering it.
We had a couple questions. I presume that you could make the insides like the night before, but there was a question about, can you make it well in advance and freeze the inside and then thaw it?
I've never tried doing it, although I am trying that with the kids this week. So I'm actually going to be doing the same thing. So I've made the filling with the kids and I'm going to put it in the freezer. and I would thaw it out for tomorrow and use it. I wouldn't freeze it for too long, just because it will get ice, and then you'll have more water content in it. If you're going to do that, if you're freezing it, make sure you thaw it out in the refrigerator at least a day ahead of time. And then again, you want to take it out to room, it won't get to room temperature because it's really cold, but you don't want it to be refrigerator cold when you're putting it in the oven. So you do want to let it sit outside for at least 30 minutes, an hour, before you fill them and put the dough on top. The filling is cooked, so you're not worried about the filling not getting cooked. The dough needs to cook, and it kind of just adds a little more thickening because it's boiling it one more time. So that's totally okay, and you can definitely make it the day before, refrigerate it, and then cook it. That definitely, if you need that extra time, you can do that. If you really like the puff pastry as well, what you can do both the bottom and the top with the puff pastry. I would suggest to par bake the bottom though if you're doing that. So I would put the dough to cover the pan. You'll want to oil spray it before you put the puff pastry so that it doesn't stick to it too much. And par bake it with beans or something to prevent it from puffing up in the oven. And then after like 10 or 15 minutes, then you can put the filling in it and cover the top over it, just so that the bottom isn't completely raw. So you do want to bake it a little bit ahead of time. But you can definitely do that and either have the double dough, or just do the dough on top. And you can definitely make it the day before, refrigerate it, use it the next day. Not a problem. You don't have to do it all in one day. Any other questions?
Is it time to eat?
I think it is. Let's see. These in the oven need just a few more minutes.
Oh, they're gorgeous.
We're gonna take them out. You can definitely do designs on top as well. Julie's my taste tester, so we're gonna let her try it.
Yum, yum.
All right, we have a spoon here.
With changes in vaccine, we're starting to talk about doing some small classes in-house. I think we're going to start with some challah classes that we might be able to do on Main Street in May and June. And we're hoping in July that all the tiers and the orders will be available so we can do small classes in our kitchen. So we hopefully you guys can try this soon. But in the meantime, it's my turn. I'm diving in.
And just to remind you guys, so next week, we're gonna be doing treats for your sweets. So we're actually gonna be using the same puff pastry dough again, we're gonna use it very differently. I'm gonna try and see if maybe I can find a dairy one, because I do prefer them with the butter. And we have our February challah that I'm selling. So you can either have our traditional challah, or this month, we're changing specialty flavors every month. So this month it's going to be chocolate chip. So you can get either a traditional challah or a chocolate chip. You can get that under the classes. So it's not a class for challah. These are challahs that I make once a month.
If you haven't had one of Liron's challahs, it really, really is worth it. She did spinach and cheese. And if you did not have a spinach and cheese challah, you make sure she gets it back on the curriculum, because it was the best challah I've ever had.
Does anyone have any other questions? I'm gonna peek in the oven. I think that they might be close to being ready.
And by the way, I did taste it, and it is delicious.
All right, so I'm gonna pull these out. All right, you can see the dough is still covering the sides. And you can see the steam coming out of those pockets. There isn't really that much juice that came out of the sides because they came through the steam. And because the dough is really covering the sides, then it helped prevent that from flowing over. So that helps. All right, we're gonna put this down over here.
Oh yeah, put it closer to me.
Yeah.
Good plan.
So definitely I would say, oh, and for the chicken, I would just get a roasted chicken. You can get a Costco one, or I've seen all the grocery stores, they have them. It's gonna be really moist because they roast them whole. You can either cut cubes or just shred it with 2 forks and add that in before you, after you add the liquids or before the liquids, at that thickening part with the liquids, add it in. It'll be a great addition. We have here about 1.5 cups of each vegetable. So you can go ahead and add about 1.5 cups to 2 cups of chicken, cut chicken, no problem. It'll be an addition, you know, it gives you the protein as well if you're looking for that meat in your meal. Not in this kitchen, can't do it. But that's definitely something you can do. And also don't forget, if you don't have the round cutters, that's totally fine. You can just cut a square, cover it over. It doesn't have to be the same shape exactly as the ramekins. And it depends on what you have at home. These are the same ramekins that I use for the souffles. Oh, souffle class.
If you don't add the milk, do you think it'll thicken up enough?
Yeah, it should thicken up because what's thickening it is the flour as well.
So if you don't add the milk, do you replace that amount with the stock or do you just skip it?
I would maybe add like half of the amount, because you also don't want, I mean, we are, you know, remembering the stock also does have more sodium, more salt and pepper and things, so you don't want it to be too overpowering. So I wouldn't add a full cup, maybe add 1/2 cup, and then you can kind of see the consistency. If you feel like it needs a little bit more liquid, then you can add maybe a little bit of water if you don't want to add that much more of the stock, if you want to avoid that. You can also taste it. If you can, once it's cooked, you can taste it and see if you feel like it's already, like it has the good flavors, add maybe just a little bit of water. Don't add more of the stock because that is going to add more seasoning to it as well. Anything else? All right, well, we're going to enjoy our pot pies. I'm gonna make a few more because I have some more filling. Every class here, I'm making, you know, these huge amounts. I can't wait to be able to teach again in the kitchen and have you guys actually cooking and eating everything as we cook. So next month, the continuation of the month, we have the Sweet Street Treats, the challah, and hamantashen. So those are the February classes that I can remember right now. And you can always take a look on our website. We have all of our new classes. March classes will be going up in a little bit, about another week or so. So we're very excited for everything, and hopefully we can have you here for classes at the J soon.